which we will have JB Friday again joining us, and he will be sharing um, some different ways to use, he'll be sharing how to conduct an effective extension program with all of you and how to use different tools to design a productive and meaningful experience for educators. So JB, when you're ready to join us, um, please feel free to jump on and share your screen.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
And if our technology cooperates, here we go. So here we are moving. So the overall structure of these workshops, especially those of you done in the past, we want to do some science and technology, some how you conduct programs. So the second two presentations in today's workshops are more about how we conduct programs. And so I'm going to be talking extension. So I'm extension forester with the University of Hawaii Cooperative Extension Service, and cooperative extension really grew out of agriculture and home economics, and getting science into the hands of farmers and people who took care of rural areas. And it grew pretty quickly also into natural resource extension, and that's my thing. So that's my paradigm. There are different paradigms, different ways, and people in this group, we're talking about outreach. Outreach covers a lot of things. And so one example is, I grabbed this screenshot from Imiloa, and I can see Imiloa from my office. They're the outreach program of the astronomers. So Imiloa is a community outreach multi-service organization of the University of Hawaii. Now, their goal is teaching the community about the cool science that the astronomers are doing. Their goal is not to get anybody to do anything, because they're studying Saturn, and you're not going to do anything about Saturn. Saturn's there. It's cool that you see Saturn, and it's cool to inform people about science, teaching people some cool science. That's one way of seeing outreach. But another way of seeing outreach, which is more our extension program, is extension is more about, we want people to get something. So we look at the coconut rhinoceros beetle, and I hadn't been to their website recently, so really nice website. But what I want to stress is that they want to do things. They want to educate people about what coconut rhinoceros beetle is. Here, this is what it looks like. But they also want people to do something. We want you to report something. So they want people to take an action based on what they see. Hey, I just noticed their cool little logo. See, they got the beetle, and then they got the coconut palm with a characteristic B-shaped incision. So boy, that's a good logo. So anyway, the point is, they want people to take an action based on what they see. And when we can assume the ultimate goal is to get rid of coconut rhinoceros beetle, because it's a nasty little pest. So when we're talking about ROD and our ROD projects, what do we want people to do? What do we want to happen? And what do we want people to do? So what do we want happen? I think, our big ultimate goal is healthy ohia forests, but we can break that down into a lot of things and develop extension programs on that. Perhaps part of what we want to happen, if you're in Honolulu, is we want to see more ohia in the urban landscape, which we don't see very much of for various reasons. Maybe we want to talk about protecting the best forests. Maybe we want to see restoration of affected forests. But looking at an ultimate goal, what conditions on the land do we want to see? A key thing for me is we want to prevent the movement of the disease into native forests, into our best native forests. And I'm here on Hawaii Island, where the disease is in every district of the island. So years ago, it would stop it from getting to Kona, then stop it from getting to Kohala, and then, okay, it is everywhere. But we want to protect our native forests. For those of you on the other islands, if you're on Maui or Oahu, you may say, hey, we want to keep ROD off our island. And then, of course, leukohea, which is the more virulent pathogen, we haven't found it on Maui or Oahu or Molokai or Lanai. We don't know why. Maybe that's your goal, but set a goal. This is what we want to have happen. Then from your goal, you want to work backwards and thinking, okay, what do we need to do? So the end state is healthy Ohia forest. This is what we want to see. What do people have to do? Well, one thing, for example, people may have to do is better biosanitation, scrubbing your boots, cleaning your tires, all that kind of stuff we've been teaching. Then why would people do better sanitation? Then you get back to the awareness. You have to have people understand what the disease is, understand enough about what moves the disease around that they do something. So then what happens is people will learn something. We hope that's why we do these extension programs, because they learn something, they should change their behavior. And that's a whole nother question that Franny Brewer at Fisk gives really has thought a lot about. What's the difference between knowing something and then taking action based on it? If we all just took actions on what we knew was good, we would all get 8 hours of sleep every night. And most of us probably didn't. And then because these changes in behavior, do we see the changes on the ground? For us in natural resources, it's a little harder because what we want to see on the ground is negative. We want to see no disease, versus if you were doing crop production and you had a new variety, you'd want to see farmers grow the new variety. And then you could go out and say, okay, who's growing the new variety and check that off. Whereas, we go in the forest, we say, hey, these forests are still healthy. That's good. A little harder to connect that. So what are we doing with the disease? Here's the extension program you've all seen, basic points, what we want people to do. We've brought that around. We've brought around to all these communities. This slide was something I presented last fall. So there's been more workshops and tables and hundreds of these things and festivals and social media outreach and all that kind of stuff. So we do all that kind of stuff. And this is a survey that CGAPS did, which I'm very grateful they did, that 2017, so only about 2 years into our program, 92% of the people on Hawaii Island knew about ROD, and 48% of the residents statewide had heard of ROD. So we did that first step. We did the awareness. People are aware, but how do we promote people to take actions that will make a difference? That's a bigger step. But in order to make our programs worthwhile, we have to go to that step. Just people being aware is, if they don't take any action, isn't really helpful. So this is a big detailed slide, but this is something that we call the logic model and extension. This is out of University of Washington extension, University of Wisconsin extension. But this is really the basic model that cooperative extension nationwide uses to think about programs, that you have this long-term change that you want to see. Then you say, okay, what do we do to create that change? And what do we need to create that? And then you start doing, and then you start conducting workshops. So you hire staff, conduct workshops and stuff like that. You hope that you hire staff, you conduct workshops, reaching participants, you hope people learn something. Then you hope they take some sort of action. And then you hope conditions change on the ground, that you want to see that. So you start with thinking about what you want to change on the ground, and you work backwards to planning to say, people have to do something. Well, what do they have to do? Oh, they have to do this. Well, to do something, you have to know something. Okay, how are you going to teach them? Well, then we need staff, we need money for our outreach programs and all that. We put that together and we set this chain of events in place. And there's your link to it. It's really worthwhile. Logic models are an entire presentation in themselves. And today, I'm afraid what I'm doing is just throwing out some different ideas of doing and doing extension. Now, here's another issue. We have an issue with wounds of infection sites, and you all know this. Trees get injured. These trees were peeled by probably goats down in Kau. And then what we find on the landscape level are these areas that are fenced and protected from ungulates have little disease. Areas that are open, full of ungulates, have a lot of disease. So this is a map of Volcano. You probably mostly have seen this. This is a modified version that, thank you, Brian, put together for me. This was 2019 data, so the story's gotten more complicated, but in 2020. But for now, basically, these hatched fenced areas, the white lines are fences, are Hawaii Volcanoes National Park or the Natural Area Reserve, Pu'umaka'ala, have very little disease. And the outside areas, which are state forests or private lands, have a lot of disease. The small dots are all, the small purple dots are from the aerial imagery. The red dots are from on the ground samplings of it. So we know this, we have the mechanism. Conclusion is fence these areas and protect the forest. Of course, that's complicated because there are other people have other ideas of what they want the forest for, in particular the pig hunters. Pig hunting is a way of life. It's the people use. People eat the pigs, and it's important for people's economic, as well as for sporting, as well as for their identity. We've all seen all these pig wars and huge community concern about that. And I don't have the answers to these. One thing insight I do have, though, is that sitting around the table talking with people gets you a lot further than big meetings, because they tend to lead to confrontations. And then I don't know, I don't see positive things coming out of these things where people are shouting at each other at a big meeting. Whereas we've had positive interactions, even when we throw out maps like that with hunting community saying, well, this is what we're seeing on the ground. Understand where they're coming from, and talking, getting feedback, and having a two-way line of communication with them. With this disease, it has been a positive that everybody loves ohia trees and nobody loves the pathogen. We see other diseases where people love strawberry guava, for example, and so they're fighting tooth and nail to save the strawberry guava. They're trying to save the feral cats. Legislation this year was trying to save the feral cats and the mongooses. So a lot of these conservation issues are a lot harder than rapid ohia death, because nobody likes the fungus, everybody likes ohia trees. One of the things that we do tend to do is we're in our own bubble. And then we don't communicate out. So this is an idea of social networks, who you communicate with. So the picture and the colored dots are something I grabbed off the web, is something other social network. But what I'm thinking is, maybe we conservationists are the blue dots there, and we all talk to each other really a lot, but then only a couple of us are over here, talking to hunters. And then there's some good work with arborists, and then there's a whole lot of arborists that we hardly ever talk to. And the laymakers are off in their own world, and they do their own thing, and they don't talk to the conservationists at all. I don't know. I'm not saying those are how it works, but what I'm saying is that, we talk with our own group all the time, and especially with social media nowadays, there's whole other groups talking, and we just don't even know what each other is talking about. So in terms of thinking about that, one of the things I really want to try to think of is, how do we have good dialogue between these different groups rather than standing back and shouting at each other? Okay, another concept here, and again, this comes out of agricultural extension, is the theories of diffusions of innovations. That this was actually done by not Hank Rogers. Anyway, Rogers, 1960s. He looked at what was the pattern of how the farmers adopted Green Revolution technology back in the 1960s when they first did the Green Revolution. And what he figured out was that only a few people, about 2.5% of people, talk to experts and learn that way. So of all the farmers, and he did this starting with farmers in Iowa, of all the farmers, about 2% of them went to the university to find out what the science was and took it home and did it on their farms. Then everybody else saw what their neighbors was doing and said, hey, your corn looks pretty good. What'd you do? Oh, I got these new seeds from the university. Hey, can I have some of your seed or something like that? And moved on that way. And he segmented the population to early adopters, late adopters, and laggards are the last people, to adopt a technology. But he really, you can see this, everything from nutritional programs to agricultural programs to, I don't know, wearing seatbelts. I mean, I'm just thinking that's a sea change since I was a kid, that, you didn't really bother wearing seatbelts when I was a kid. And then eventually everybody did. But for us in extension, you want to find these people that are innovators, the people that are interesting in doing something new, that aren't afraid of being the weird guy, but have the respect. The innovators have to have the respect of their community. Because if you reach the people that the community doesn't respect, that doesn't go anywhere. Well, those guys do it. They're idiots anyway, so I'm not going to bother doing it. But, got to have the people, the community leaders, and then getting out to it. And we saw this, for example, with the hunting program that we did a couple events with hunting, that we reached, some people from that community reached out to us and said, hey, we want to know about this. Can you help us? And then we work with them, and then they reached out to, dozens and dozens of people that we never would have reached. The next idea, and I'm really throwing out a salad of ideas here, but the next idea is we want to incorporate rapid OHIA death into programs that are ongoing, that we can't have, we're not envisioning doing tabling events for rapid OHIA death forever. We want it to be part of programs that are ongoing. So for example, Teaching Change is a program about teaching forest ecology to intermediate and high school students, particularly looking at effects of climate change on how the forest changes. Part of that is diseases. Rapid OHIA death gets into their curriculum, and then they're off and running. And, we can help out with that, but that's a whole set that it gets integrated in the curriculum. Another thing that's been integrated in the curriculum is eco-tour operators. And we're going to have a whole workshop on this, a session on this later. But again, my idea was reaching tourists. Most tourists want to hang out in the pool with a drink and an umbrella. They don't care. But what about the eco-tour operators? So we did a whole program. We brought awareness of weeds, disease, pests, as well as ROD, and did a whole series of trainings for eco-tour operators, where we had workshops, trained 102 operators. And those people are our change agents now with the tourists who care about the environment. I mean, not that the horses don't care, but they interact with nature, interact with the OHIA forest. They're going out with the eco-tour operators. So the tour operators are change agents. We're not trying to communicate to every tourist who shows up on the islands. We're trying to communicate with the guides that take the tourists into nature, selecting those key audience, and then getting it integrated into a program. The Sustainable Tourism, used to be the Hawaii Ecotourism Association, is put together training modules on these things that the operators can go through and get trained on this in order to get their certification for being that. So the idea of getting your programs integrated into a program that someone else is doing, so it's not just you doing it. And I wanted to finish up with some discussion on evaluation of effectiveness of your programs. This is last year's program where we gave people little evaluation things where you ask those questions, low, medium, high. This year we're doing on a Mentimeter because we're all on Zoom. But you really want to know, did people learn anything? Did people take any actions based on what they learned? And did conditions improve? So again, a typical ag exam. Well, let me do this. A typical nutrition. So the colleges of ag, also we have nutrition programs. So you do these things on diet. Say you're going to try to get people to eat more complex carbs. So they're not eating all the sugary white bread and that kind of stuff. Did people learn anything? Hey, this is better for your health. Did people take any actions? Are people improving their diets? Then did diabetes go down because people aren't eating as much sugar and eating as much junk? That's the sort of thought pattern for a totally different thing here. How do we know that? Well, when we're reporting, and this is, I don't know what you all have to do for reporting. I know for my reporting, for the University Cooperative Extension, we're always asked, okay, what are your activities? What'd you do? And I did this, this. But what happened because of what you did? That's the harder thing to report. So, and we think about these things in the short time. I should have said short term in those. In the short term, this is these workshop surveys that we do. So did you learn anything here? Yeah, I learned things. Okay, good. Check that box. Medium term, did you go home and do something? So we're going to survey you folks in 6 months or a year. I haven't figured out when we're going to do it. And please, answer us. Did you take this and do something with it? And then long term, did something change because of it? And for ROD, that's going to be not us surveying, but the people surveying such from ROD and that kind of stuff. So we are planning, starting with the end in mind. So you plan what you want to do and work backwards. And then evaluation, you check each step as you go along. Because if you didn't teach anybody anything, then nothing's going to happen, right? Because they didn't learn anything. But if they did learn something, then maybe nothing happens anyway because they didn't know what to do about it. And maybe they did something, but it didn't have the desired effect. Maybe your new variety of crop is super susceptible to another pest and it didn't work. So in order to justify what you're doing, you've got to figure out, is it working, and conduct that evaluation. We're all wearing masks these days. One of the other very powerful things is why people take action is this idea of social norms. And I just want to throw that out, that social norms is what you just do as a good citizen. Putting on a seatbelt. In my lifetime, smoking has changed. When I grew up, people smoked everywhere and nobody cared. My dad smoked inside the house. My mom didn't like it, but it was a normal thing to do. Now it's the normal thing. If you got to smoke, go outside. Don't pollute everybody else. It's an improvement. Now we're all wearing masks. How about a social norm in Hawaii is you sanitize, you decontaminate before you go into a native ecosystem. That is the social norm in other places. We can very much make that a social norm here. So summarizing, think about what you want, actions you want to take about, and what results you want for those actions. So we're not just busy, but we're thinking about the results. Think about how you're going to reach out to other groups. And then lastly, keep up with new developments in the science and management. Your outreach presentations, if you do them, should be different next year than they are now. And that's part of this workshop. So you're keeping up, and all of you, thank you for doing that, because you're keeping up with that. Here's my contact information, Hoku's contact information. And if you're not following us, if you do social media, and if you don't do social media, that's great. It can be a real time suck, but if you do, we're on social media for these things too. So that is the presentation. I would be happy to stop sharing and go back to discussion questions. And again, I really threw out a lot of ideas. Happy to discuss any of these further.
Thank you, JB. I think as of now, the only chat that came through was with Christy just mentioning that they have funding for another survey, and that she's going to take some ideas from folks to see how we can do that for maybe 2022 when COVID's not so much on everyone's minds. But that was what was in the chat box.
So one of my other ideas for behavioral change, though, is if you can survey people of focus groups about what you did. And I always end up getting anecdotes, which are something, you know, if you introduced a new crop and you knew there are only 30 basil growers on the island, and you could just survey them all and you find out what people did. And then like the nutrition people do these kind of things. They do community surveys. They do a lot of this community surveying because everybody eats dinner. So your client is everyone who eats, and then you can do some sort of survey of this. And I think for natural resources, we have to figure out how we do that assessment of both behavior changes. And then it's the monitoring people do changes on the ground, right? You know, I mean, everybody out there surveying for rare plants and doing the drones and everything else of that.
I think you just had one more from Jeff.
Any ideas on managing up and messages to get actions within an organization?
Yes.
Success is really, what's that saying? Failure is an orphan, but success has 100 fathers. So, you know, if you do something that's successful, everybody is going to want to take some credit for it, including your upper administration. You know, and I know at least for us, we put out a weekly little bulletin of what our college has done. So, you know, they're loving it. If you get cool things with some photos and here's our cool event, and these people did it and they went home and did it. And, you know, they really like that. Also for us, at least, we are, as a college, we're responsible to USDA for a lot of our funding. So every year we've got to pull together our success stories, which means instead of being busy doing your programs all the time, you got to take a deep breath and go back and look at, here's what I did last year. Did it work? Pull that together into a story for your reporting. And again, Jeff asked this for DOFO. I don't know what DOFO expects of their people doing programs, but I know for us, they want to see some changes in disease incidents, like the disease was found much less. And you know, for commercial farming, they want to see farmers made more money. They'd love to see it, but they'd also like to see reduces of things like exports, like coqui frogs. Samples, shipments of plants were getting rejected because they had coqui frogs in them. And that's a huge cost. So if you can go from last year, 30% of our shipments got rejected, and this year after our program, 2% got rejected, bingo. And that's going to go all the way to the top of your organization.
Nice. Nice. Thank you, JB. Oh, there's one more question in there.
The meetings with the hunting committee. So that picture of the guys with the boar, that was an event called the Hunt for the Forest. And it was actually a community member down in Nonavale who approached us and said, hey, I do hunting derbies. And so with her leadership, we organized a little mini derby, a little mini environmental fair. There was with a hunting derby. And so they have their ways they do hunting derbies, and everybody gets a tag and they go out and hunt pigs and they bring them out and weigh them and that. And we had tables from Docare and Rod and a whole, like 10 or 12 different environmental things, good food trucks. And it was a community event in Nonavale, and everybody talked to each other in a really pleasant way. But other than that, like Pig Hunters Hawaii was kind of got the organization kind of died off, and then some younger guys started up again. And we sat down in Panaeva, sitting around tables in the community center, talking story about what we're seeing on the ground from Rod, what they care about. We didn't agree on things, but we had a really good conversation, and a lot of aloha between our different points of view. So that kind of thing I think has been positive. And I don't, once fences go up, there still might be headbutting. There's always going to be some people headbutting, but part of the thing that pisses people off, the fences go up first and then they start talking. And that really pisses people off. If you start talking before the fences go up, there are people that aren't going to be pissed off about it, say, okay, we understand why this goes up. Hawaii has a real history of top down. Plantation Days was very top down. I'll let the rest of you decide whether ancient Hawaiian was more top down or not. But there is that history of, it's like the sheriff of Nottingham and it's the king's forest and the peasants are in there causing trouble and they're all outlaws paradigm. And it's that there's a history of that, and the communities are sensitive to that.
Great, thank you, JB. I think it's time we can do our Mentimeter, Hoku,
the Mentimeters,
and then we'll get onto our last presentation and have everybody adjourn for the day.